Hello, I'm Duncan, and in this video I'm going to talk about why world building became so fascinating to me. This is a little bit different from the others in the series. This is a little bit of a sidestep, I suppose, away from our main theme. But it is relevant, and it, I think, is interesting to see how my understanding of world building has developed in the direction it has, and why. So I was first published as a contemporary crime novelist back in 2003, and I wrote a series of novels at that time, and then for some reason which is not relevant to today's story, I switched over to the area of science fiction and fantasy. Basically, a story came to me that I couldn't get out of my head, so I just felt I had to write it down. Now, I thought, well, I'm a published crime writer. I should fairly easily be able to write something in the field of science fiction and fantasy. I'm a fantasy and science fiction reader after all. Surely my skill set will just move straight across. They say that we learn more from our mistakes than from anything, and I'm just going to tell you now about this big mistake that I made, because of course I was wrong. There was a whole skill set that I hadn't been practicing, and that was the skill set of world building. So I wrote a novel that would become The Bullet Catcher's Daughter, and I wrote it all, and then I showed it to a good friend who's a very accomplished young adult novelist, who's worked in the field of fantasy writing, and he looked at it and read it very kindly for me. And he told me, well, I really like some of this, but you've put in a whole load of world building here, which I don't think you need. You've put in these great big chunks of exposition, explaining stuff that you can just leave out. Strip them all out, and your book will be very much better. So I thanked him very sincerely for the advice, and I went away and I spent a number of months doing exactly what he had suggested. I stripped out these great big chunks of exposition that had been there, and when it was all ready and neat and tidy again, I sent it off to an agent. And the agent responded to me saying, well, this is really good, I like this a lot, but what I would like you to do is to put in a whole series of things that will help us understand the world, some world building. Now, you might think that the first set of advice had been wrong if I was to then get the second set, or perhaps the second set is wrong and the first set was right. But what I did was go away, spend a number of months feeding back that world building into the book, but perhaps not quite in the same way that it had been there at the beginning. Now it was threaded in, one thread at a time, a little bit here, a little bit there. There weren't the big chunks of exposition. And the things I was saying about the world, the strange world of the story, they seemed to arise more naturally out of each scene in which they occurred. And this book, The Bullet Catcher's Daughter, was then published, and I was very grateful and very happy that it received some very wonderful responses, a lot of reviews, shortlistings for a number of awards. It was shortlisted for the Philip K. Dick Award, which was a tremendous honour because that's really one of the most prestigious awards in science fiction. And when I started to see the reviews coming in, reader reviews, I was gratified to notice that a lot of people were commenting on the world building and praising the world building. Since I'd struggled over that very thing for so long, this was particularly pleasant for me, obviously. But I was interested to note that the things people were mentioning in terms of the world building were not the things that I had really laboured over. People were picking out, I'm going to give you one example, one particular thing which was in the world that I described, which is a Victorian-esque world in which Britain has been divided by a civil war into a republic to the north and a kingdom to the south. There were a different culture in the north, a slightly more austere culture in the north, a slightly more flamboyant culture in the south. And it was this cultural difference that people were commenting on. Now that had actually been very much an afterthought for me. I had divided this world up politically into these two nations, these two blocks. And it was only really that afterthought to say, well, how did the cultures differ? And I'd teased them out a little bit and then put people in more grey colours and subdued colours in the north, made their mannerisms somewhat more subdued, and in the south, in the kingdom, given them brighter colours, bright greens and reds, and made them somewhat more loud and extrovert. It was a subtle thing, a little bit here, a little bit there, but that was what people were picking up on in praise of the world building. So what was going on, I realised at that time, was that the people reading the book were taking those little hints and in their own minds constructing something considerably more elaborate and more detailed than I had initially imagined and that I believed I had put in. And so that was the seed for this particular understanding, this particular approach to the idea of world building. Now, if you have enjoyed this, please do, as usual, click on the thumbs up below, and if you haven't already, do please subscribe to the channel.